Hey, so welcome back to my channel. So I'm going to continue with my recap of Mrs. Wilson. What I did find out was that I didn't realize this was actually based on her actual family, the woman playing the lead role, which is, her name is Ruth Wilson. So this is based on what her grandmother went through. And I didn't, so I didn't know that when I first started. I knew it was based on actual events. I just didn't realize that it was based on her actual family. So, of course, and in the beginning they did a recap of the first episode, and of course at the end, the name Dorothy came up, and she's was trying to figure out, okay, so who is Dorothy? And so we find out who Dorothy is throughout the course of this episode. So, it opens up with Alison. She's actually going through like photos and records, and she actually finds a photo of a woman that looks familiar to her, but she doesn't know who she is. And so around this time, Gordon walks in, and she's kind of short with him, and he's like, oh, well, I'll just let you know that, I'll be leaving soon. He has to go back. He's in the Navy, so he's going to have to leave soon. And so she goes to see Coleman, who was his handler, and she starts asking her about Dorothy, like, who was Dorothy and who was my husband? I'm trying to figure out who this man was. And she basically told her that Dorothy was someone who was, she basically painted a faux picture of Dorothy being this operative that pretended to be his wife, and she was actually helping the cause. Okay, so that's how she really painted Dorothy. She said some things, but she didn't say a whole lot, because she was like, you remember you signed the Secrecy Act, and so that there's things that I can't tell you. And of course Alison got frustrated, and Coleman actually mentions their son. She was like, why you keep dredging this up? You have two sons, one in the Navy, one is going off to college. Just leave this alone. Stop digging. And it came across as a threat, like, you should probably let this go, or else, your son's military career is not going to go the way he wants, or your son is not going to get into this university. He wants to go to Oxford. It was something that him and his dad talked about, and he applied, obviously, before his father passed away. And so at this point, he's just waiting to get, hear back whether or not he was accepted. And so that kind of stopped Dorothy in her tracks, and she, kind of dropped it from there. And so, she's back at home, and Alex and Gordon are typing up a letter to, some office, basically asking about a place called Blakefield. I think it was called Blakefield Manor or something. This was their father's family home, and it was commandeered. I mean, that's not the right word, but during the war. And so they were using it as a base of operations. And so they basically wanted to write to see, when they can take ownership of that property again, because they want to keep it in the family. And of course, Alison was like, well, you know what, I'll write the letter and I'll send it off, and I'll take care of that. And so they got up and they left her to it. She signed the letter, and she mailed it off. And so then there's this flashback of her and Alex, but of course this is at the point where they were still dating. They weren't yet married. I have to use married in quotation marks, but he pulls up to this huge house, and he's telling her that this is Blakefield Manor, and they're still using it as a hospital. And then this nurse walks out, and she's like, oh, hi, I was here to see the matron. And the woman's like, oh, Major Wilson, she's on into town, but if you want to wait, that's fine. And so they decide to stay and to have a picnic, and that's when she told him that she was pregnant with Gordon, and that's when he eventually proposed. Okay, so Gordon is he's leaving now, and they're saying their goodbyes, and he's asking questions like, what's going on? Like, things are not really adding up to him, and she's really trying to shut him down. He was like, I'm going to make some inquiries and call this person and that person. She was like, no, don't do that. I have the time. I'll take care of it. And so, they say their goodbyes, and he gets in the taxi or whatever, and he goes off. And so she decides to go back to their old apartment. This is when they first got married, and this is where they had where she had Gordon, but she was I think they moved out around the time she was pregnant with Nigel. And so there was a guy actually living there. He was like, well, he used to live at the bottom and now he moves up. But the thing is, when she pushed the button for the guy to buzz her in, she was like, oh, I'm Mrs. Wilson. I used to live here. Da, da, da. So as she's walking up the stairs, he said something to the effect, or you only went like you just left Mrs. Wilson, like trying to figure out why she was back. And so she kind of stopped in her tracks and she's like, okay. So she goes into the apartment, and the guy was like, oh, I hope you're not coming back after all this time to get his books, because he's a fan of Alex. He's familiar with Alex, and I think I said in the first recap that Alex was an author and he wrote a ton of books, and he's a fan of his work. And while he's talking, Allison is standing by the window, and she had like this brief flashback. She was holding Gordon, and she could see out the window that Alex was talking to some woman and gave this woman some money, but she really didn't know what that was all about. And so she hands the guy the photo of this woman that she found, and she's trying to find out who this woman is. And he confirmed that is in fact Dorothy. And so she's trying to find out what she can about him, but of course he wasn't going to miss this opportunity to make a few dollars. So he's like, okay, you give me this amount of money and I'll tell you what you want to know. So they money exchanged hands, and then he pulled some records, some books or something. I don't know if there was like the lease or rental agreements or something from the previous tenants or something. I don't know, but he pulled out a book that stated that Alex, Dorothy, and Michael, who was Dorothy's son, who's Dorothy and Alex's son, lived there in 1939. And so Allison was like, okay, so where am I? I lived here I moved in here in 1941. He was like, well, there's no record of you. All I know is that one day I just saw a woman with a baby on her hips, and that was basically how he described her. Like, no one really knew who she was. Okay. So of course she felt some kind of way, but she got the confirmation that she needed who this woman was, and she was able to get a forwarding address for Dorothy. So she's back home, and Nigel walks in, and he's excited because he got into Oxford, and their relationship is kind of odd and strained, but she was happy, and she wanted to celebrate, but of course he had already had plans with his friends. He was going away, and he pretty much packed, got his stuff, and I believe that's when he left to go. They were going camping or something. I don't know. Okay, so now he's gone. So now Allison is on the train to somewhere. Okay, and so that somewhere we realize is Dorothy's address, because remember she left the forwarding address, and so Dorothy opens the door, and of course she's taken aback. She's not expecting to see Allison there. And Dorothy is in fact the woman that we kept seeing in the first episode that just happened to run into her in the bathroom, that was standing in the corner of the restaurant, watching them. So that was Dorothy. So she had been following Alex the whole time, trying to find out what he was up to. And so she knew who Alice was, but of course Alice didn't know who she was. So when she opened the door, she was taken aback because she knew who Allison was. I keep calling her Alice, but it's Allison. And so she reluctantly let her in, and she saw the photo of Dorothy and Michael. Now the difference between that photo and the other photos that she saw, Alex wasn't in those photos. He wasn't in that photo. So it's like, okay, what was this about? And so they started talking, and she finds out that things were a slightly different than what Coleman had told her. She wasn't an operative. She wasn't a spy. That her and Alex had met, and they fell in love and got married. And so, of course, now she's taken aback because it's like, okay, this wasn't like some grand plan that, the powers that be had to infiltrate whatever, to gather intelligence, and the way Coleman was trying to point, this was actually a real relationship. And they started talking, and of course Dorothy admitted that he told me about you, But what he initially told, of course, there was flashbacks back and forth. He basically told Dorothy that she was his secretary, and basically he was this typist, which in the beginning was true. He would do the translations and she would type it up, but it was partially true. And she was saying that he basically, the difference between Dorothy is like he had left Dorothy and he just never looked back for some odd reason. She was like he didn't support them, and the entire time that she was raising their son on her own, he gave her like £5, or I guess what we could say $5, and it wasn't that type of situation that he had with his other wives, again, quotes, and that so Alison was asking her, what did you tell Michael? She said, I told him the only thing I could tell him, because I didn't want to tell him the truth, because I didn't want him to turn around to hate his father. And see, throughout all this bullshit that this man has put these people through, they're still trying to protect him by shielding their sons from his lies and deceit and all of that. And so she said the way that I handled that was I basically told him that, your father was trying to protect his friends and that he was basically killed in action. And Dorothy she kind of got upset. She was like, so wait a minute. He thinks for the last 20 years, he's been under the impression that his father died. And so Dorothy, she was appalled, which I found I was like, the hypocrisy was just a bit much. I'm like, because it's not like you're telling your sons what's going on with, what's happened with their father, like who he really was. And so for you to kind of give Dorothy a hard time for doing the same thing, she felt that she was protecting her son, just like now you feel like you're protecting yours. I was just kind of taken aback, like, okay, who do you think you are right now? But she, Dorothy was like, I did what any good mother would do. I created a safe, a happy environment to raise my child, and I protected my child, and that's what any good mother would do. And so they eventually said their goodbyes, and as she was walking, she had told her before letting her in that Michael was on his way there, and so that's why initially she didn't want to let her in. But as Alison was leaving, Michael was walking to his mom's house, and so she stopped him, and she went there, and she was like, "You're Michael, aren't you?" He was like, "Well, yeah." Like he was looking kind of like, "Who?" She's like, "Oh, I just left your mom." He was like, "Oh, you're a friend of hers?" She was like, "Oh, I'm a friend of your dad." And it was almost like she was going to tell him, which I would have thought, okay, that would have been so effed up if you had done that. Because if somebody, if somebody would have walked up to your sons and like, your father was not who you thought he was, he had all these wives and got these other kids that nobody knew about, you would have hit the roof. So I felt like, okay, I'm like, you kind of waiting, like, what is she actually going to do? She basically said that, yeah, I knew him. We used to work together. And I mean, that was pretty much, she was like, oh, and you look like him. And so she, said her goodbye. She was like, oh, well, I have a train to catch. And she kept going. I was like, oh, okay. I'm kind of giving her the side eye. Like, no, I know you're not. I know you're not about to do that. But, okay, she kept walking. Well, at least I hope that's what happened. This is what they're selling in the show. Like I said, this is based on true events. So, I don't know. But, in the episode, she kept walking. She went on the Carter train and went on back to the house. So, so she's on the train and she's going back and she's having a flashback to 1944 where, okay, so she's already had Gordon. He's like, he looks to be like 4 years old, maybe, if that. So she's walking up these long flight of stairs to get to their apartment. You can see that she's clearly, at this point, she's pregnant with Nigel. And so, she gets to the apartment and he's, packing the suitcase, and he was like, oh, well, we have to move because they may have found somebody else who they can get more money from. And so they basically downgraded to this crappy A apartment. And the next scene you see is her in labor, and her mother shows up, and her mother is like dressed down, so you can tell that she came from like maybe an upper middle class background. And so you can tell she's in labor, and she actually gives birth to Nigel. Okay, now one thing I should say, when I'm gonna go back a little bit with the Dorothy and Allison situation. So when Dorothy said she knew about Allison actually got upset with Dorothy because she felt like, you knew about me. I was 20 something years old, and you knew what I was getting myself into, and she felt like Dorothy should have given her a heads up or said something. And Dorothy was like, I was just trying to protect my son. She was basically trying to protect what she had, which in the end really wasn't anything. But so Allison did get upset with her, Dorothy, for she felt like not like tapping her on the shoulder, pulling her coattail, and saying, "Girl, no, this is the deal, and I don't think you should be bothering him." But who's to say that if she had done that he wouldn't have just found somebody to explain it away and just paid her as this jealous ex or whatever? Whatever. Okay, so now we're gonna go back a little bit. I don't know why, because it dawned on me that I forgot to add that, so that's what I did. Okay, so she's had Nigel. She's now sitting down with her mother. They're sitting down to brunch or lunch or something, and her mother is basically, after seeing how she was living, she was really kind of appalled, and she really felt some kind of way about having her grandchildren her daughter and her grandchildren in that situation. And she basically started questioning Alice, like, what are you going to do to support my daughter and my grandkids? Like, this place is it looks like it's a hovel. Like, what are you guys going to do? And so she actually made, which I thought took guts and balls to say this, to sit across from her daughter and her husband, again, quote, and say, well, what we think is, we think that, Gordon, he's older, and he, as he gets older, he's going to become more and more independent. But as far as Nigel, and your uncle and I were discussing this, we think that you should give him up for adoption. And of course, they're sitting across from her looking like, she's like, I'm not giving my son up. And of course, Alex is like, I'm not giving my son up. No way, no how. It's never going to happen. And the mom was like, well, just think about it. This is, he would have a better life, and he would have better opportunities. And look how you're living now. You could barely afford it. And you guys are struggling, and basically having another mouth to feed is not going to help your situation. And they're like, no, we're not giving up our child. Okay, yeah, so trying to keep my notes straight. Okay, so back to the present. Okay, she finally gets a response about Blake Manor, the house, what was supposed to be Alex's family home. And basically the letter said that we basically confirmed that they received her inquiry, and that there is no record of the Wilson family ever owning that property. So that was yet another lie he told her. Okay. And so she goes to meet with, his name is Shabazz Kareem. This is the Indian guy that actually came to the grave that initially mentioned the name Dorothy. And so she goes to meet him, and he's sitting down, and it's like this private club or something. She's sitting down talking to some guy, and she walks over and is like, "You're a liar." And so of course he got up and kind of shuffled her off onto the side. He's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, you said that he was a good man, and you knew about all his deceit and debauchery and and how was he a good man and blah blah blah." And he starts telling him about how he met Alice in their relationship. Kareem was actually one of his handlers, and he initially talked about how he met him when he was married to the first wife, Gladys, and he was still working on his books, and he was in India, and he was actually the one that introduced him to Dorothy, who was an actress. And he basically asked Dorothy to get Alex into the governor's mansion, this party that they were having, so Alex was able to gather the intel that they needed. And so that's how Dorothy and Alex met. And he was basically saying, she's like basically telling her how wonderful her husband was and the sacrifices that he made, and He was concerned when the relationship got more serious. They ended up falling in love with each other, and he knew that could potentially cause problems. And so he actually tried to talk to Dorothy and was like, we don't want you to get hurt. And he really didn't want it to continue, but of course Dorothy is like, yeah, okay. She, they felt how they felt, or at least she felt how she felt. Who the hell knows? This man was a pathological liar. So we can't even speculate on what his true feelings were towards anybody. I mean, at this point. And so he ends up telling her that the only reason he married Dorothy was because he found out she was pregnant. But he never signed the paperwork, which is why there's no paperwork on his marriage to Dorothy, because it was never, official, because he was already married to Gladys. So, Alice said, so what about the women that he left in his wake? So we're just left to pay the price. And he was like, he basically said that, yeah, that was the price, that, you paid for the service that he provided to this country. And that's basically his attitude. Like, all these women and children that was left in his wake, and the devastation and all of that was collateral damage to what their mission was. And so, which of course is a bunch of BS, because he really, it was, nobody has to do all, that was just, that's crazy. But that was his take on it. And so the next time you see her, she's in the church, because, she's really struggling trying to keep it together. And so she's talking to the priest, and his response was, she said, Alex let me and my family down. There are a lot of things that I, didn't know about him. And the priest was like, she's like, so what am I supposed to do with my, my boys? I don't know, I don't really know what to do. And so he was like, protect them. And what he was really saying was protect. It was all, this whole kind of story is about protecting him and his image, and their opinions of him, even though their opinions was based on this guy who wasn't what he presented himself to be. And so she got home, and she was thinking, and she got the letter that said that they had never owned a home. And of course she tried to forge it to make it seem like, and she forged the letter, and you saw the sons coming home, and they were talking, and it was like, well, let me tell her. This is the Nigel telling Courtney, like, well, let me tell her. So at this point, we don't know what he's talking about. They get into the house, and she has this whole spread laid out for them. She's cooked some of everything, just food all over the table, and she hands them the letter saying, we got a response. And of course, Nigel is like, oh, so they're using it as a training base, and I knew it, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And so he runs upstairs. He goes up. No, so Gordon basically says that, oh, well, I found a place for Nigel to stay somewhere. And of course, Allison is like, well, why are you doing that? I'm fine. Everything is fine. And so Nigel ends up going upstairs to start packing. And this is when Gordon lets her know that he's been doing his own research, and he knows that his father was a lie, that nothing his father told him was true. He checked, where his father went to school, where his father claimed he worked. He already knew that the house was never owned by the Wilson family. Like, he's let her know all of this. And he was like, well, Mom, so what is going on? She was like, are you lying to us too? And she was like, what? He's like, are you lying to us too? Did you create this letter? And then she just told him to get out. And she was like, take you and your brother, just get out. And she throws him out the house. Now, I get that she's frustrated, and the person that she's upset with is no longer there, and I feel like it's, deflection, like she's taking it out on them. But the fact that things are not adding up, and he's questioning what the hell is going on, for you to blow up at him, obviously that should have never happened. And so you can hear them whispering. He walks out of the kitchen, and around this time, I think Nigel is coming downstairs with his bag or whatever, and you hear whispering like, I want to say goodbye, but he didn't. I guess Nigel went on. We couldn't see them at this point, so Nigel probably went on the shelf this behind on out the door. You hear the door slam behind them, and she's sitting at the table, just spiraling, because she's just spiraling. Her whole life is just unraveling, and in front of her, and she just doesn't know what to do at this point. And so she's at the table, and then she remembers that she took his wallet. So she goes to get the wallet, and she's checking his wallet to find anything she can find. And then sewn into between the leather, she felt something. So she opens it up, and she finds this card. And so she's kind of looking at this card like, okay, why would he hide this? It looks just like a regular card. Nothing, stands out about it. But the fact that it was hidden in his wallet, like sewn into his wallet, she's like, okay, what is this about now? And so that's how this episode ends. Okay, so the mystery of who Dorothy is. Okay, we got that. And so there's still one more episode, so God only knows what's going to come out. I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.